Right now, off a beach you have swum at, a shark bigger than a school bus could be watching you. It carries over 300 razor teeth. Its bite beats a lion's. It has the power to end your life in one strike, yet it almost never does. Ahead, secret shark nurseries, a killer whale that hunts great whites for their liver, and the real reason the ocean's deadliest hunter keeps letting you go. Hit like and subscribe if this pulls you in. Take a breath. We are going under. Off Cape Cod, a fin cuts the surface for 2 seconds, then vanishes. That flash of grey is the only warning most people ever get that a great white shark is close by. And most of the time, they never even get that. A fully grown great white shark can stretch past 20 feet long, roughly half the length of a school bus, and weigh more than a loaded pickup truck. Its body is shaped like a torpedo, thick through the middle and tapered at both ends, built for one thing: cutting through water with almost no drag. Inside its jaw sit close to 300 teeth, packed into several rows like a stocked shelf. Each tooth is triangular and serrated along the edge, closer to a steak knife than a fang. When one breaks off during a hunt, which happens often, a fresh tooth from the row behind slides forward within days to take its place. A great white shark never runs out of weapons. This is the animal that earned the nickname the ocean's deadliest predator, and for good reason. Few living things on Earth combine that much size, that much bite, and that much stealth in one body. A great white can approach from below in near silence, and strike before its target even registers movement. Decades ago, a single movie sealed that reputation into public memory. Beachgoers who had never once thought about sharks suddenly refused to swim past their knees. That fear did not fade with time. It got passed down, generation after generation, until an entire species carried the weight of one story that was never meant to be a documentary. Marine biologists who track these sharks along the California coast have followed individuals swimming less than 100 yards from crowded beaches on a summer afternoon, completely unnoticed by anyone in the water. The shark was there the entire time, cruising past legs and boogie boards, and then it simply moved on. Here is where the story gets strange. Every single day, all over the world, people swim, surf, dive, and paddle in the exact waters where great white sharks hunt. Beaches in California, South Africa, and Australia sit within a short swim of known shark territory. Millions of people enter that water every year. Almost none of them are ever touched. That single fact does not match the reputation this animal carries. A creature with the size, the teeth, and the power to kill in seconds should, by pure logic, be a constant threat to anyone sharing its water. Instead, encounters remain rare, and most of those encounters end without serious harm. So which version is true? Is the great white shark the mindless killer that decades of movies and headlines have described? Or is there something else going on beneath the surface? Something in the shark's own biology that explains why the numbers do not add up to the fear? That question is what this entire journey is built around. We are going to trace it through the shark's senses, its stomach, its instincts, and even its own predators. And by the end, you will understand this animal in a way almost nobody at the beach ever does. But first, to understand why people fear this shark as much as they do, you need to understand exactly what a single bite from it can actually do. And that number is more brutal than most people expect. A team of engineers once built a computer model of a great white shark's skull just to answer one question: how hard can this animal actually bite? The result surprised even the scientists running the test. A large great white shark can clamp down with a force topping 4,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Researchers built this model using real skull scans and jaw muscle measurements taken from actual great white sharks, not rough guesses. To picture that, imagine standing a small car on its side and balancing the entire weight on a single tooth. That is roughly the pressure a great white shark can generate in one bite. For comparison, a lion, an animal humans already fear as one of the strongest predators on land, bites with roughly half that force pound for pound. A human jaw, the strongest muscle most people will ever personally test, is more than 20 times weaker than a great white's. Even a saltwater crocodile, widely considered one of the strongest biters alive today, comes in just below a great white shark on that same scale. Two animals from completely different worlds, one built for murky rivers and one built for the open ocean, ended up with almost the same crushing power in their jaws. If you have ever stood in the ocean past your knees, that is the kind of force that could have been only feet away from you at some point, resting quietly on the seafloor, doing absolutely nothing. The bite itself happens fast. A great white shark often rams into its target before the jaws even fully close, then shakes its head side to side once it connects. That head shake looks violent and out of control, but it is a precise tool, built to tear a chunk of flesh free in one pass, the same way you might rip a piece of bread instead of slicing it clean. Here is the part that should stop you cold. A bite carrying that much force does not need a second attempt. One clean strike from a great white shark is more than capable of ending a human life in seconds, whether it hits an arm, a leg, or anywhere else on the body. So picture the math for a moment. An animal with a bite that powerful, swimming in the same water as millions of swimmers and surfers every single day, should statistically be responsible for constant tragedy. If even a small fraction of the sharks living along a single coastline decided to use that bite on a human once a year, beaches would need to shut down permanently. Real numbers tell a very different story. Confirmed fatal shark bites worldwide add up to a small handful most years. An animal capable of unbelievable destruction keeps choosing, again and again, to leave us alone. That single contradiction sits underneath every fact in this story. An animal with the power to kill instantly, choosing almost every time to hold back. It becomes a story about restraint from an animal nobody expected to show any. To understand why, we first need to look at exactly how often these encounters happen in the first place, and how differently the numbers read once you strip away the fear and just look at what actually gets recorded. Researchers once ran a survey asking people to rank their worst fears about getting hurt: car crash at high speed, falling from a third-story window, getting mauled by a bear, getting bitten by a shark, shark attack 1, by a landslide. Fewer people picked it as their preferred option than any other choice on the list, meaning more people feared it more than anything else on that page. Here is the twist nobody expected going into that survey. A bear attack, statistically, kills a larger share of its victims than a shark attack does. Somewhere between 8 and 15 out of every 100 people mauled by a bear do not survive it. For sharks, the number sits lower than that. So the animal people fear the most turns out to be a poor predictor of what is statistically most likely to kill them. Fear and actual risk turned out to be two completely different measurements, and most people had been mixing them up their whole lives. Part of the reason comes down to simple exposure. Bears live on land, where humans spend almost all of their time, yet bear encounters barely register as a national fear. Sharks live somewhere most people visit only occasionally, for a few hours at a time, on vacation, splashing near the shallows. That unfamiliar setting makes every encounter feel bigger and scarier than it statistically is. Now add in the actual math. Across every ocean on the planet, all shark species combined bite fewer than 100 people in a typical year, out of a global population approaching 8 billion humans, a huge percentage of whom live near a coastline. Household dogs, an animal millions of families invite into their homes without a second thought, are responsible for more human deaths every year than great white sharks are. Along the coast of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, tourists pack the beaches every summer while great white sharks patrol just offshore, drawn there by a booming population of seals. Lifeguards fly drones overhead specifically to spot the sharks and warn swimmers when one gets close. Even with sharks reliably present in the water almost daily during peak season, the number of people actually bitten in a typical year stays in the single digits, if it happens at all. That gap between sharks being present and people staying safe follows a clear pattern, one with real explanations behind it. None of this erases what a single bite can do, you already felt the weight of that number, a bite strong enough to crush a car door, capable of ending a life in seconds. That part of the reputation holds up completely. What breaks down is the picture most people carry in their heads, an ocean crawling with sharks actively hunting every swimmer in sight. So, if the fear runs bigger than the risk, a new question opens up. When a great white shark actually does bite a human, what happens in that moment? Full attack, teeth locked in, shaking and pulling the way movies show it? Or something else entirely? Something that barely resembles a hunt at all? That question leads straight into one of the strangest patterns found in decades of shark research. And it starts with a single number: how often the shark simply lets go and swims away. A century ago, getting bitten by a great white shark was close to a death sentence. Doctors at the time had few tools beyond basic bandages and hope. Historical records from before 1950 show that roughly 9 out of every 10 people bitten did not survive the encounter. By the 1950s, that number had dropped by nearly half. Somehow, without the shark itself changing at all, more people were walking away from bites that once would have killed them. Today, the number has fallen even further. Fewer than 1 in 5 people bitten by a great white shark now dies from it. In raw terms, the odds of surviving an encounter with the most feared predator in the ocean have flipped almost completely over the span of a single century. Picture 2 people, decades apart, both bitten in the exact same spot on a beach in South Africa. The one bitten in the 1930s had almost no real chance once the shark made contact. The one bitten today, thanks to a mix of luck, faster help, and something in the shark's own choice to let go, has a real shot at walking away with a lifelong story instead of a headline. Doctors and researchers point to a few clear reasons. Emergency medicine improved dramatically. Lifeguards, boats, and other swimmers can now get an injured person out of the water and to a hospital within minutes instead of hours. In some regions, response times that once took hours now take only minutes, cutting blood loss down to a fraction of what it used to be. Tourniquets, blood transfusions, and trauma surgery techniques that did not exist 100 years ago now save limbs and lives that would have been lost. Medicine alone does not fully explain the shift, though. Victims increasingly describe the same strange detail in their accounts. The shark struck once, then swam away on its own, without any pursuit, as if the encounter had already run its full course after a single bite. That detail shows up again and again across decades of recorded encounters, from South Africa to Australia to the coast of California. It happens too often to be written off as luck in every single case. That matters for anyone who has ever stood at the edge of the water wondering what would happen if the worst-case scenario found them. The odds today are not the odds your grandparents grew up fearing. The story shifts here, from statistics to biology. A bite carrying the crushing force we already described does not leave much room for medicine to work with if the shark were truly finishing what it started. A great white with real intent to kill and consume a person would not need a second attempt, and survival rates should not have room to improve this dramatically, no matter how fast the ambulance arrives. Something in the shark's own behavior during that first strike is doing just as much work as any surgeon standing by afterward. To understand what that something is, we need to look closely at the moment of the bite itself, and at a pattern scientists have been documenting for decades. It has a name, and once you understand it, almost nothing about a shark encounter will look the same to you again. At a research archive that has tracked recorded shark encounters since the 1500s, a team once combed through decades of cases, looking for a pattern buried inside all of them. What they found became one of the most repeated statistics in modern shark science. In roughly 2 out of every 3 encounters, the great white shark bites once and then leaves. No return strike, no chase back toward the beach. The shark simply turns and swims away, often disappearing into deeper water within seconds. A marine researcher who spent years studying great white sharks along the South African coast noticed something even stranger buried inside that pattern. He had personally watched more than 1,000 real predatory attacks on sea lions, the shark's actual preferred prey, and every single one of those attacks looked completely different from what happens during a human encounter. When a great white shark hunts a sea lion, it rockets toward the surface at full speed and hits with overwhelming, explosive force, the kind meant to stun or kill instantly. It is a full commitment, built entirely around finishing the job. Human encounters almost never look like that. Witnesses and survivors describe something closer to a slow approach, a single test bite, and then a retreat, almost unhurried compared to the violence of an actual hunt. One researcher described it as leisurely, a word nobody expects to hear used about a shark attack. Think about what that word actually implies. A predator capable of launching its entire body out of the water to kill a much faster, more agile animal is choosing, again and again, to approach a slow, defenseless human at a fraction of that intensity. That behavior fits an animal checking something out far better than one locked onto a meal it desperately wants. It deals with a mistake in seconds and moves on before committing any further. Some of that retreat can be explained by circumstance. A victim near a boat, near other swimmers, or fighting back gives a shark fewer reasons to stay. But the pattern shows up even in isolated cases, far from any rescue, where nothing forced the shark to leave except its own decision. So the shark bites, feels something unexpected, and stops. That single detail flips the entire encounter from a hunt into something closer to a very dangerous case of curiosity gone wrong. But curiosity raises its own question immediately. If the shark is not hunting a human on purpose, why does it bite in the first place? What is actually happening in that split second before the jaws close, from the shark's own point of view, looking up through murky water at a shape it has never fully learned to identify? That answer starts with something scientists only recently managed to test directly: what a great white shark actually sees. At Taronga Zoo in Sydney, a team of scientists once filmed something unusual on purpose. They recorded seals swimming, then had human swimmers and surfers paddle through the exact same water, capturing every angle from directly underneath. Their goal was not to study humans at all. It was to rebuild what a great white shark actually sees. Using the footage, researchers led by biologist Laura Ryan built a computer model of a shark's visual system, stripping out color, blurring fine detail, and recreating exactly how light and shape would register on a real shark retina looking upward from below the surface. What came back on screen stopped the team cold. From directly underneath, in the exact position a hunting shark would take, a human paddling on a surfboard produced almost the same shape and motion pattern as a swimming seal. A swimmer kicking along the surface looked nearly identical too. This marked the first time anyone had actually tested, frame by frame, whether a shark could reasonably confuse a human for its normal prey, rather than just assuming the answer based on how humans see the two shapes. The results supported a theory that had circled shark science for decades without real proof behind it, known simply as mistaken identity. Somewhere below the surface, a hunting shark spots a silhouette it recognizes from a lifetime of eating seals, and it reacts on instinct before anything else can override that first signal. Picture standing on a rooftop at night, looking down at two people wearing the exact same dark coat under a streetlight. From that distance and that angle, you would not be able to tell them apart either. The information reaching your eyes simply would not be detailed enough to separate two similar shapes that far below you. That is close to what a shark experiences every single time it looks up at something moving along the surface. The scientists behind the study were careful about one thing. They never claimed every single bite comes down to confused vision. Some encounters clearly involve other factors entirely. But for a huge share of surface-level bites, especially the ones involving surfers, the visual evidence lines up almost perfectly with a simple case of mistaken identity. So why would a shark's eyesight be blurry and confusable in the first place, when its other senses are famous for being some of the sharpest in the entire ocean? The answer to that question changes everything you think you know about how a great white actually experiences the world around it. Imagine watching an entire movie through a shower door covered in fog, with the color turned all the way down to black and white. That rough, blurry, colorless image is close to how a great white shark experiences the world through its eyes. Sharks, in general, have far weaker visual sharpness than humans do. A great white cannot pick out fine detail the way a person standing on a beach can. Fabric patterns, skin tone, the specific outline of a wetsuit zipper. All of that detail simply does not survive the trip from the shark's eye to its brain. What remains is closer to a rough shape and a direction of movement. Color makes the picture even fuzzier. Great white sharks appear to see the world with little to no color vision at all, relying instead on contrast and brightness to separate objects from their background. A bright red surfboard and a dull grey one might register as almost the same shape to a shark, simply two blocks of contrast against open water. Now stack murky water on top of that. Along many coastlines where great white sharks hunt, visibility drops to just a few feet once sand, plankton, or storm runoff clouds the water. In those conditions, even a shark's already limited vision gets pushed even closer to useless. Here is the detail that should genuinely surprise you. Despite all of that blur, the great white shark remains one of the most successful hunters in the entire ocean, catching fast, alert prey that can see far better than it can. Vision ranks surprisingly low on a shark's list of senses, nowhere near as important as what happens through its skin and snout, a fact we will come back to shortly. That single fact reframes everything about the mistaken identity theory from the last chapter. A shark works from a rough, colorless, blurry impression, shaped by murky water, weak color vision, and low detail, making a split-second decision based on almost nothing, rather than staring at a clear, detailed image of a human and choosing to attack anyway. Given how little information a shark actually has to work with in that moment, the real surprise stops being that mistakes happen at all. The real surprise becomes how rarely they happen, considering how often confusable shapes must pass overhead every single day. There is one more detail buried inside every study on this topic that pushes the picture even further. The sharks responsible for the vast majority of these confused encounters turn out to be barely more than children, still learning what their own eyes and instincts are even telling them. A great white shark starts life small, vulnerable, and almost defenseless. Nothing like the finished apex predator people picture when they hear the name. It measures often no longer than a grown man, delivered into open water with no parents sticking around to protect it or teach it anything. For the first several years of its life, a young great white shark eats almost nothing like what the adults eat. Its jaw has not developed the strength yet for tackling seals or sea lions. Its mouth even sits differently, angled downward and built for scooping up bottom-dwelling fish, crabs, and small rays close to the seafloor, not for grabbing something moving fast at the surface. Somewhere around the point where the shark stretches past 10 feet long, its whole body starts to shift. The jaw thickens. The bite strengthens dramatically. The mouth itself repositions, moving forward into the powerful, forward-facing grip built for locking onto a seal and holding on through a violent struggle. Only then does the shark start adding marine mammals to its regular diet. That transition period, somewhere in a young shark's adolescence, turns out to be exactly when most confused encounters with humans tend to happen. Think about what a 15-year-old is like compared to someone who has spent 30 years doing the exact same job. Instincts are still forming. Judgment is still catching up. Mistakes happen more often, simply because there is less experience backing every decision. A teenage great white shark is going through a version of that same process. Except the stakes of a single wrong call happen to involve a human being in the water nearby. Its eyesight is still developing. Its ability to tell the difference between a seal and something that only resembles one is still developing. Its bite, while nowhere near as crushing as an adult's, is still more than capable of causing serious injury to a person, even without the full force behind it that a grown shark eventually carries. This detail helps explain a pattern researchers have noticed for years. Bites involving surfers, the group statistically most at risk, tend to line up closely with the size range of these still developing sharks, roughly the length of a small car rather than a full-sized adult stretching past 20 feet. So, an animal not yet finished growing into its own instincts ends up responsible for a huge share of the encounters that built the entire reputation of the species. A mistake made by an inexperienced teenager gets recorded in the history books as proof of a mindless killer, when the truth involves an animal still learning the difference between its next real meal and something that only looked like one for half a second. But instinct and inexperience only cover part of the story. Even fully grown adult sharks, ones with decades of hunting experience and perfect confidence in what real prey looks like, still leave humans alone almost every time. That means something bigger than confusion is happening, something that comes down to simple math. A marine biologist studying great white sharks off the California coast once noticed something odd. Sharks in the area swam past penguins and sea otters constantly, animals that were slow, easy to catch, and right there in plain sight without ever bothering to attack them. At the same time, those same sharks would launch themselves fully out of the water chasing seals, an animal far faster and far better at fighting back. That pattern did not make sense under the assumption that a shark simply eats whatever is easiest to catch. So the researcher proposed a different explanation, based on a concept from animal behavior called optimal foraging theory. The idea works like this. Every hunt costs a predator real energy in searching, chasing, and fighting. A smart predator, even one running purely on instinct built over millions of years, gets the most value out of its life by targeting meals that pay back the biggest energy return for that effort. Great white sharks, according to this theory, are what scientists call energy maximizers, running a constant calorie calculation with nearly every hunt they attempt. Seals and sea lions happen to be some of the richest meals available anywhere in the ocean. A layer of thick blubber can make up half of an animal's total body weight, packed with far more usable energy per pound than lean muscle provides. One researcher compared a baby seal to a hot dog, where the surrounding fat plays the same role as the bun, wrapping a dense, high-value package that a shark can digest quickly and put straight to use. Penguins and otters, by comparison, run lean. Their bodies rely on tight, dense fur or feathers for warmth instead of a thick, fat layer. To a shark's internal calculator, chasing one barely covers the energy spent catching it, if it covers it at all. That mismatch is enough to make an otherwise easy meal simply not worth the trouble. This changes the entire lens through which a shark evaluates anything moving through its territory. Every potential meal gets run through a constant, instinctive cost and benefit analysis, built entirely around one goal: staying fueled enough to keep that massive, warm-blooded body running in cold, demanding water. Now, hold that idea in your head for a moment, because it leads directly into one of the clearest explanations for why humans barely register on a great white shark's menu at all. Once you understand what a shark is actually built to want, the next question answers itself almost instantly. What happens when that same calculating hunter bites into something that fails the test completely? Picture sitting down to a meal that looks appealing at first bite, only to discover it is packed with bones, tough muscle, and almost none of the rich, fatty flavor your body was actually craving. Most people would push the plate away after one bite. Something close to that appears to happen inside a great white shark's mouth during a huge share of human encounters. Human bodies carry a fraction of the fat content that a shark's preferred prey provides. Where a seal might be roughly half fat by weight, a human body runs lean, dense with muscle and bone, closer in composition to the fish and rays a young shark eats before it graduates to marine mammals. That mismatch creates a real problem for a shark's digestive system. Sharks process food slowly to begin with, and bone in particular takes an especially long time to break down. A body loaded with a human skeleton's worth of hard, dense material can sit undigested for days, tying up a shark's stomach and blocking it from eating anything else during that window. For an animal built entirely around staying fueled through an extremely demanding, high-energy lifestyle, a slow, low-value meal like that carries a real cost, even if the shark never consciously reasons through any of it. Instinct built over millions of years of evolution has already done that math for the shark, long before a single bite ever happens. This helps explain one of the most consistent details recorded across decades of shark encounters. After an initial bite, sharks very often release their grip and swim away without ever returning to finish what a true predatory attack would typically finish. Something about that first taste, the texture, the fat content, the overall composition of what just entered its mouth, appears to fall well outside what a shark's body actually wants. Some researchers describe it almost like sending back a meal after the first bite tells you everything you need to know. The shark reaches that outcome through pure instinct rather than conscious thought, yet the result looks remarkably similar. A quick sample, a rapid reassessment, and a decision to move on towards something that will actually pay off. The bite itself, as you already know from earlier in this story, still carries more than enough force to cause devastating injury regardless of how the encounter ends. Being the wrong shape of meal does not make a human body a safe thing to be bitten by, but it does help explain why so many of these encounters end after a single strike instead of escalating into anything closer to a true feeding event. So if humans genuinely are the wrong shape of meal, biologically speaking, a strange question follows right behind it. Why does a shark bother biting at all, if the outcome offers so little reward? The answer has nothing to do with hunger, and everything to do with the only tool a shark actually has for exploring the world around it. A human baby, handed something new and unfamiliar, almost always does the same thing without being taught. It brings the object straight to its mouth. Lips and tongue are, for a baby exploring the world for the first time, some of the most sensitive tools available for figuring out what something actually is. A great white shark, in a strange way, is stuck doing something similar for its entire life, and for a very simple reason. It has no hands, no fingers to reach out and touch something unfamiliar drifting through the water, no arms to hold an object up close for a better look. A shark's entire physical toolkit for interacting with the world comes down to one thing: its mouth. Marine researchers who spend their careers on boats around cage diving sites describe this constantly. A curious great white shark approaching something new in the water, a buoy, a camera housing, a piece of equipment hanging off the side of a boat, will frequently open its mouth and apply gentle pressure, testing the object the same way a baby tests a toy. This is worlds apart from how the same animal behaves during an actual hunt. A predatory strike on a seal involves explosive speed and crushing, sustained force from the very first contact. An investigative bite looks almost nothing like that. Divers and researchers who have witnessed it describe a slower approach and a lighter touch, closer to sampling than attacking. For a human in the water, unfortunately, gentle by shark standards still means an enormous amount of force behind those 300 teeth. A bite that a shark itself might register as a light, exploratory test can still cause devastating injury to a person purely because of the raw physical mismatch in size and power between the two. That single detail may explain more real-world encounters than almost any other fact in this entire story. A shark spots an unfamiliar shape at the surface. Curiosity, or the early stages of a hunting instinct, pulls it in for a closer look. With no hands available for the job, it does the only thing biology gave it the tools to do. It bites, briefly, gathers whatever information that bite provides, and in most cases, releases and swims away almost immediately afterward. The moment stays every bit as terrifying and dangerous for the person involved, even while it reframes what is actually happening from the shark's side of the encounter. It looks far closer to an animal running its only available test on something it does not yet understand, then almost immediately deciding the test is finished. rather than a predator locked onto a meal and refusing to let go. So, if a bite functions as a kind of investigation, the obvious next question becomes what other tools a shark uses before it even opens its mouth. It turns out the mouth is nowhere near the most sensitive part of a great white shark's entire body. Every living thing in the ocean gives off a tiny electrical signal, whether it wants to or not. Muscles contracting, a heart beating, even the small electrical charge released by a wound. All of it leaks into the surrounding water as a faint electric field, far too small for a human to ever notice without specialized equipment. A great white shark can feel it directly. Scattered across the shark's snout sit hundreds of tiny pores, each one leading down into a jelly-filled canal packed with specialized cells. Scientists named this system the ampullae of Lorenzini, after the researcher who first described it centuries ago. Together, these structures give a great white shark something humans do not have at all: the ability to sense electricity itself. The sensitivity involved is almost hard to believe. A great white shark can detect fields as faint as 1/1,000,000th of a volt. To put that in perspective, imagine trying to notice a single dim phone flashlight switched on somewhere across an entire city, using nothing but the skin on your face. That is roughly the scale of signal a shark's snout can pick up without effort. This sense becomes especially useful in situations where a shark's other senses fail completely. Buried prey hiding under sand, animals frozen still in total darkness, even a wounded creature bleeding out somewhere nearby. All of them still produce that same electrical signature, one a shark can track with total precision regardless of how dark or murky the water gets. An injured animal actually becomes easier to detect than a healthy one. Torn tissue and leaking blood push out an electrical signal several times stronger than an uninjured body produces, essentially turning a wound into a beacon that leads a shark directly toward it. A shark approaching a human in murky, low visibility water has a second, far more precise system running constantly in the background, feeling for the electrical hum of a living body, even when the eyes cannot make sense of what they are seeing, well beyond whatever blurry, uncertain glimpse its eyes alone might catch at the surface. That combination, weak vision paired with an almost superhuman electrical sense, starts to paint a much clearer picture of how a great white shark actually experiences an encounter with a person in the water. But there is a strange twist buried in all of this. At the exact moment a great white shark commits to a bite, one of its two main tracking systems shuts down completely, forcing the other to take over entirely on its own. Right at the exact instant a great white shark's jaws close around something, its eyes disappear. The eyes roll backward and downward into the socket, tucking away and out of danger the moment real contact happens, rather than vanishing outright. Prey does not go down without a fight. Claws, teeth, and flailing limbs from a struggling seal could easily damage an exposed eye during a violent strike. So evolution built in a simple, elegant safety mechanism. Protect the eyes by pulling them out of harm's way at the one moment they are most at risk. The cost of that protection is enormous, though, for a brief window during the most critical part of any attack, a great white shark is functionally blind, unable to see the very target it just committed its entire body toward. This is exactly where the electrical sense described earlier becomes essential rather than just useful. With vision temporarily offline, a shark leans completely on its ability to feel electricity, tracking the exact location of a struggling, thrashing body purely through the faint electrical signal leaking from its muscles and, if the bite has already broken skin, from the wound itself. Picture trying to catch someone in a dark room with the lights suddenly switched off the instant you reach out to grab them. Most animals would lose track of their target completely. A great white shark, instead, switches seamlessly onto a different sense entirely, following an invisible signal through total darkness, as if nothing had changed at all. This detail adds an entirely new layer to everything covered so far in this story. During the single most dangerous, most committed second of an encounter, A great white shark operates almost completely blind, guided by instinct and electricity rather than any careful, deliberate view of what it just grabbed, reacting to signals its brain has processed thousands of times before without ever needing to see the outcome directly. That helps explain why some bites happen at all despite everything you have already learned about a shark's caution and its calorie math. In that split second of blindness, there is no visual confirmation available, no final check to catch a mistake before it happens. The decision to strike gets locked in before the eyes could ever contribute anything useful anyway. So, an animal already working with blurry vision, an electrical sense that can be fooled by proximity alone, and a moment of total blindness built directly into its most dangerous move, starts to look less like a calculated killer and more like a creature running almost entirely on instinct laid down over millions of years. None of that instinct, though, explains how an animal this large manages to hunt at full power in freezing water that would leave most fish sluggish and slow. That answer involves something happening deep inside the shark's own body, something scientists only fully understood a few decades ago. Almost every fish in the ocean shares one basic trait. Its body temperature simply matches whatever the surrounding water happens to be. Swim into cold water, and a fish's entire body cools down right along with it. Muscles slowing, reactions dulling, energy dropping. A great white shark broke that rule. Deep inside a great white shark's body runs a network of blood vessels. Scientists call the ret mirabile, a name that roughly translates to the wonderful net. Warm blood, leaving the shark's powerful swimming muscles, runs directly alongside colder blood, heading back out toward the gills, and heat transfers between the two in passing, like two pipes pressed together, one hot and one cold, warming each other through contact alone. The result is remarkable. A great white shark can keep its swimming muscles, its brain, its eyes, and even its stomach running noticeably warmer than the freezing water surrounding its entire body, sometimes by well over 10 degrees Fahrenheit, even while hunting in water cold enough to leave most other fish barely able to move. Scientists call this partial system regional endothermy, a mechanism that heats only the parts of the body that matter most for hunting, while leaving other areas closer to the temperature of the surrounding ocean, well short of the full, constant warm-bloodedness a human or a dog experiences. Think of it like a race car engine that only warms the parts directly responsible for horsepower and steering, ignoring everything else that does not affect performance. Every ounce of warmth gets funneled towards speed, strength, and sharp senses, the exact combination an apex predator actually needs in the moment it matters most. That warmth changes everything about how a great white shark hunts. Warmer muscles contract faster and harder, translating directly into bursts of speed most cold-blooded fish simply cannot match. A warmer stomach digests food faster too, letting the shark process a meal and get back to hunting sooner instead of sitting sluggish for days. This single adaptation helps explain why great white sharks can thrive in cold, nutrient-rich waters other large predators avoid entirely, patrolling coastlines from South Africa to Cape Cod where the water rarely climbs out of the 60s, even in summer. And that internal furnace, running constantly beneath the surface, is exactly what powers one of the most explosive, jaw-dropping moves in the entire animal kingdom. A hunting technique so violent and so specific that people now travel across the world just to watch it happen from the safety of a boat. Off the coast of South Africa, at a place called Seal Island, boats full of tourists gather every winter morning for a single, specific reason. They are waiting to watch a great white shark launch its entire body out of the ocean. The move is called breaching, and nothing else in the shark world looks quite like it. A great white shark hunting seals near Seal Island will dive down along a steep underwater drop-off, sometimes plunging more than 80 feet straight down, before rocketing back upward at full speed, breaking the surface completely and sending its whole body airborne, sometimes twisting and cartwheeling through the air before crashing back down into the water. This counts as a precise, calculated hunting technique rather than any kind of display or performance. Seals are fast, agile swimmers capable of outmaneuvering a shark in a straight chase, attacking from directly below, using the dark, deep water as cover, gives a great white shark its single best shot at landing a surprise strike before the seal even knows it is being hunted. The technique works often enough to matter. Researchers who have studied breaching at Seal Island for decades estimate a shark successfully catches its prey on close to half of these attempts, an extraordinary success rate for an ambush move that depends entirely on split-second timing and pure explosive force. Local guides gave these animals a nickname because of it: flying sharks. Here is where this story circles back to everything you have already learned. This exact move, arguably the single most violent, most committed hunting technique in the entire ocean, one capable of launching a 5,000-pound animal completely airborne, gets used almost exclusively on seals. It essentially never happens during an encounter with a human. Divers, surfers, and swimmers sharing water with great white sharks around the very same regions where breaching happens regularly do not report anything close to this level of explosive commitment directed at them. The slow, investigative approach described earlier in this story remains the pattern, even in locations where the shark clearly knows how to unleash something far more extreme when it actually intends to. That gap says everything. An animal fully capable of an attack this violent, this calculated, and this committed is choosing, over and over, to hold that same intensity back from a human in the water. To pull off a move like breaching even once, a great white shark needs one more advantage working in its favor, something separate from strength or timing entirely. It needs raw, blistering speed, and the ability to disappear into darkness before anyone even realizes it is there. A great white shark accelerating toward the surface can hit speeds close to 35 miles an hour, comparable to a car cruising through a neighborhood street, except this particular vehicle weighs thousands of pounds and moves through water instead of air. That kind of speed does not come from raw muscle alone. A great white shark's entire body is shaped like a torpedo for a reason, thick through the middle, tapered sharply at both ends, built by millions of years of evolution to slice through water with almost no resistance holding it back. But speed by itself would still not be enough to catch a fast, alert seal watching for danger from every direction. The real advantage comes from where the shark chooses to attack from in the first place. Sunlight filtering down through open ocean creates a natural spotlight effect near the surface, while everything below fades quickly into shadow and darkness. A seal swimming near the top of the water sits fully lit, its silhouette clearly outlined against the bright surface above. A shark waiting in the deeper water below sits hidden inside that same darkness, essentially invisible looking upward from below, even while its target remains completely exposed looking downward from above. That imbalance gives a great white shark an enormous tactical advantage before the hunt even begins. It can watch, wait, and choose its exact moment from concealment, then convert stored potential energy into a single burst of speed the instant it commits, covering the distance to the surface almost too fast for the target to react at all. Think of it like an attacker waiting in a completely dark room, watching someone standing directly under a bright light through an open doorway. One side has full visibility, the other side has none. That gap in awareness, combined with pure speed once the attack begins, is often the entire difference between a successful hunt and a missed one. This same darkness and depth strategy applies just as easily to any human swimming or surfing near the surface, technically. A shark holding position in deeper water could, in theory, use identical tactics against a person the exact same way it uses them against a seal. Yet encounters built around this kind of premeditated ambush, involving a human specifically targeted from concealment and struck with full commitment, remain almost unheard of in recorded shark attack history. The advantage exists. The tool exists. The pattern of actually using it against people simply does not show up in the data, reinforcing everything this story has built toward so far. Not every encounter with a great white shark happens through violence, though. Sometimes, this same predator does something that looks almost gentle, almost curious, closer to a kid checking out something new than anything resembling a hunt at all. A young marine researcher working off the coast of South Africa once had a great white shark lift its entire head clean out of the water, right beside his boat, and just look at him. It lifted its head, held there, and simply watched him, taking in the boat, the people, and whatever had caught its attention, for several long seconds before sliding back down beneath the waves. Scientists call this behavior spy hopping, and almost no other species of shark on Earth is known to do it. It shows up occasionally in whales and in orcas, animals widely recognized as unusually intelligent, but among sharks, the great white stands out as one of the only ones documented lifting its head above the surface specifically to look around. Researchers who study this behavior describe it as investigative rather than predatory. A shark doing this typically approaches slowly, almost playfully, showing none of the tense, coiled energy that comes before an actual strike. It behaves less like a predator sizing up a meal and more like someone leaning over a fence to see what the noise next door is all about. Boats themselves seem to draw this kind of curiosity constantly. Great white sharks living near popular diving and fishing areas have learned to associate boats with unusual smells, vibrations, and movement, and many will circle a boat repeatedly, sometimes for several minutes at a time, without ever making contact or showing any sign of aggression. That circling behavior gets misread constantly, largely thanks to decades of movies training people to see a fin cutting slow circles around a boat as the build-up to an inevitable attack. Marine researchers who witness this pattern regularly describe something far closer to information gathering. The shark is using every sense available to it, electrical, visual, and otherwise, simply trying to figure out what this strange, unfamiliar object floating on the surface actually is. Put this alongside everything covered so far in this story, and a much clearer picture starts to take shape. An animal that spy hops out of pure curiosity, circles boats to gather information rather than to hunt, tests unfamiliar objects gently with its mouth, and reserves its most violent, most committed hunting technique almost exclusively for actual prey, does not match the mindless, indiscriminate killer people have pictured for decades. Something far more interesting is going on beneath that reputation, something that goes deeper than simple curiosity or a single misidentified silhouette. Recent research has started uncovering a side of great white sharks almost nobody expected. Evidence that these animals remember individuals, choose who they spend time with, and quietly run far more complex social lives than any shark was ever given credit for. In the warm lagoon waters of Fiji, a research team spent 6 years doing something nobody had managed before. They tracked 184 individual bull sharks across nearly 500 separate dives, learning to recognize each shark on sight the way you might recognize a classmate in a hallway. For decades, sharks carried a simple reputation among scientists: solitary hunters, loners, animals that crossed paths only to fight or to mate, then went their separate ways without a second thought. The data from Fiji told a completely different story. Certain sharks kept showing up beside the same other sharks, dive after dive, year after year, far more often than random chance could explain. Some pairs stayed close together, swimming within one body length of each other for long stretches. Others matched their speed and direction almost perfectly, moving in sync the way two friends might walk side by side down a hallway without even talking about it. One particular pair stood out from the rest of the group entirely. Researchers began recognizing these two sharks swimming together so consistently across so many separate dives spanning multiple years that the team started referring to them informally as a match set, long before any published paper ever put a name to the pattern. Researchers studying grey reef sharks at a remote Pacific atoll found something just as striking. Using tiny acoustic tags, they tracked individual sharks for 4 straight years and discovered the sharks were not wandering randomly through the reef at all. They kept returning to the same general group of familiar faces over and over, building something that looked a lot like a stable neighborhood rather than a random crowd. Here is the detail that stopped scientists in their tracks. This kind of long-term bond does not happen by accident. To keep choosing the same specific individuals to swim beside, avoid others, and reunite with old companions after months apart. A shark needs something researchers call social memory, the ability to recognize a specific individual and remember something about their past relationship with it. Think about what that actually requires inside a shark's brain. It is not simply reacting to whatever happens to be nearby. It is comparing what is in front of it right now against a memory built up over months and using that memory to decide who to trust and who to avoid. Great white sharks have not been studied nearly as closely as bull sharks or reef sharks on this exact question, since they roam far greater distances and prove much harder to track over long stretches of time. Researchers who study shark cognition broadly now believe the same wiring likely runs through the entire species, from the smallest reef shark to the largest apex predator in the ocean. One detail from the bull shark study adds an extra layer worth sitting with. The strongest, most consistent friendships showed up almost entirely among fully grown adult sharks, the exact animals capable of the most damage, the same ones people picture as mindless killing machines with nothing running through their heads except hunger. Somewhere beneath that reputation sits an animal capable of choosing companions, remembering faces, and quietly maintaining relationships across open ocean for years at a time. If a shark's mind runs that deep, an obvious question follows right behind it. How does an animal built almost 400 million years ago end up with a brain this complicated in the first place? For most of the last century, if you asked a scientist to rank animal intelligence, sharks barely made the list at all. Fish brains, in general, carried a reputation as simple, wired almost entirely around basic reflexes. Bite when hungry, flee when threatened, nothing close to the layered thinking found in dolphins, elephants, or crows. That reputation is falling apart fast. Researchers who study shark brains directly have found something nobody expected going in. When you compare brain size against body size, a great white shark lands in a range surprisingly close to some birds and mammals, animals long considered the smartest creatures on the planet. A shark is not simply carrying a bigger version of a goldfish brain. It is carrying something built with real complexity behind it. That complexity shows up clearly in behavior, not just in brain scans. Sharks studied in controlled settings have solved puzzles that required remembering a sequence of steps, adjusting their approach after an early attempt failed, and applying a solution learned in one situation to a completely new problem they had never faced before. That kind of flexible problem solving, adapting on the fly instead of running the exact same fixed response every time, was once considered a skill reserved almost entirely for mammals. Picture handing two different students the exact same math problem. One simply memorized a formula for this one specific question and freezes completely the moment the numbers change. The other actually understands the underlying idea and can rework their approach the instant something shifts. For most of history, scientists assumed every shark on the planet worked like that first student, running on pure memorized instinct with zero real understanding underneath. New research increasingly points toward the second student instead. Some of the clearest evidence comes from an unexpected place: the social bonds covered just a moment ago. Recognizing hundreds of different individuals, remembering which ones to trust, and adjusting behavior based on that memory takes real cognitive horsepower. That is not the kind of task a simple, reflex-driven brain can pull off convincingly. A great white shark's intelligence runs on an entirely different track than a human's, built by millions of years of evolution to solve ocean-sized problems rather than human ones. Even so, the old picture of a shark as a mindless eating machine, driven by nothing more than raw hunger and blind instinct, misses an enormous piece of what is actually happening inside that skull. An animal capable of this much social awareness and this much flexible problem solving becomes far more believable as a creature that can tell the difference between a real meal and a genuine mistake, then adjust its behavior instantly once it figures that out. That brings this story to one of the strangest places on the entire planet, a spot in the open ocean where hundreds of these clever, complicated predators disappear to every single year, for reasons researchers are still only beginning to understand. Somewhere in the open Pacific Ocean, roughly halfway between the coast of California and the islands of Hawaii, sits a stretch of water that satellite images make look completely empty. No coastline nearby, no reef, no obvious reason for anything interesting to happen there at all. Every single year, without fail, hundreds of great white sharks leave behind the rich, seal-packed waters off the California coast and swim straight toward that empty patch instead. Scientists first noticed the pattern by accident, back when researchers started strapping satellite tags onto great white sharks to track their movements along the coast. Instead of staying near shore where the food supply seemed obvious, tagged shark after tagged shark peeled away and headed out into open water, converging on the exact same remote spot, one stretching roughly the size of an entire American state. Researchers eventually gave the region an unofficial nickname that stuck: the White Shark Cafe. At first, the whole thing looked like a mistake in the data. Why would an apex predator abandon a coastline stacked with easy meals to travel hundreds of miles toward a patch of ocean that satellite images showed as practically a desert? One scientist leading the tagging project compared it to watching an animal suddenly catch a scent and take off running after it. It behaved, in his words, as if it had picked up on something and started chasing it, without any obvious clue from the surface about what that something actually was. For years, that question sat completely unanswered. Some researchers guessed the sharks were traveling there to feed on something hidden deep beneath the surface. Others wondered if the entire trip revolved around mating instead, a theory that made sense given how little anyone actually knows about where and how great white sharks reproduce, a mystery this story will circle back to soon. Both explanations remain just that, educated guesses, built on tagging data alone, with no one able to say for certain what was actually happening once the sharks arrived. Here is what makes this particular mystery so unsettling to sit with. This is one of the largest predators on the planet, the exact same animal responsible for every fact covered so far in this story, and it kept disappearing en masse into open ocean every year for over a decade before scientists could explain why. An animal this large, this powerful, and this thoroughly studied along the coast can still vanish completely once it swims far enough from shore, slipping into a part of the ocean humans have barely begun to explore. Eventually, a team of researchers decided they had waited long enough. They loaded up a research ship, followed the tagged sharks straight into the cafe itself, and discovered something about their behavior once they arrived that turned out to be even stranger than the mystery of why they came in the first place. A research ship named the Falkor sat anchored in open Pacific water for over a month, its crew running around the clock, determined to finally understand what great white sharks were actually doing once they reached the White Shark Cafe. What the instruments picked up made almost no sense at first glance. Tagged sharks in the cafe were diving straight down, repeatedly, to depths beyond 1,000 feet, then rising back toward the surface, only to turn around and dive straight back down again. Some male sharks repeated this exact pattern well over 100 times in a single day, an exhausting, energy-draining routine that would only make sense if something valuable waited for them down in that darkness every single time. Picture running up and down the stairs of a 50-story building, over and over, non-stop, for an entire day. That is roughly the kind of relentless physical effort these sharks were putting into a stretch of open ocean that satellite images had shown as basically empty just years earlier. The deeper the research team looked, literally, the less empty that ocean turned out to be. Using submersible cameras and genetic sampling, scientists discovered the cafe sat directly above something called the deep scattering layer, a massive, shifting cloud of small fish, squid, and other creatures that spends daylight hours hiding in deep, dark water, then rises closer to the surface after dark to feed under the cover of night. Researchers documented well over 100 different species living down there, an entire hidden ecosystem operating just below where satellites could ever detect it. That discovery reframed the whole mystery. The sharks appeared to be tracking this deep moving buffet as it shifted up and down with the daily cycle of light and darkness, an enormous vertical migration playing out completely out of sight from any boat or satellite passing overhead, rather than diving repeatedly into any kind of lifeless void. Even with that discovery, one enormous piece of the puzzle remains genuinely unsolved. Female sharks in the cafe behave completely differently from males, sticking closer to the surface at night and dropping deeper during the day, following a totally different rhythm than the constant, exhausting up and down pattern the males repeat. Researchers still do not fully understand why the two sexes split their behavior so sharply once they reach this exact same patch of ocean. So, the original question about food gained a real answer. A newer, stranger question opened up right behind it, one that remains only partly explained even now. What happens in a private, hidden pocket of the deep ocean between male and female great white sharks, thousands of feet down, entirely out of view of anyone watching from above, stays almost completely unknown. That gap in scientific knowledge points toward an even bigger blank spot at the center of everything researchers understand about this animal, a single missing piece, so significant that experts openly call it the holy grail of shark science. Great white sharks have circled this planet's oceans for longer than almost any large animal alive today. Scientists have tagged them, filmed them feeding, followed them across entire ocean basins, and studied their bodies down to the smallest detail. In the entire history of ocean science, nobody has ever documented a great white shark giving birth in the wild. Sit with that for a second. This is one of the most intensely studied predators on the planet. An animal wealthy documentary crews and dedicated scientists have spent entire careers trying to capture on film. Yet, the single most basic moment of its entire life cycle, the literal beginning of every great white shark that has ever existed, has remained completely hidden from human eyes. Researchers know the basic biology involved. A female great white shark carries her pups for roughly a year before giving birth to live young, fully formed and ready to survive completely on their own. From the very first moment, since neither parent stays around afterward to help, what nobody has ever pinned down is exactly where, or exactly when, that moment actually happens. Some of the world's leading shark scientists have spent literal decades chasing this single answer. Researchers have found dead pregnant females washed ashore, with unborn pups still inside them, giving scientists a rough sense of size and development. They have tracked adult females with satellite tags for years at a time, following every mile of their migration. What they have never managed to do, despite all of that effort, is catch the actual birth itself on camera, or even confirm beyond doubt the exact location where it regularly happens. One leading shark biologist described finding this birthplace as one of the true holy grail questions in the entire field, a phrase researchers rarely reach for unless a mystery has resisted every tool science has thrown at it for years. Why does this particular gap matter so much? Knowing exactly where great white sharks give birth would let scientists protect that specific stretch of ocean directly, shielding the most vulnerable stage of a threatened species, right at the exact moment it needs protection the most. Right now, that protection simply cannot happen, because nobody can say with total certainty where the nursery boundary actually begins. Multiple regions around the world have earned the label of likely birthing ground based on indirect evidence. Tiny, newly born sharks showing up reliably in the same waters year after year, seasonal patterns that repeat with striking consistency, tracking data pointing toward the same general stretch of coastline again and again, likely still leaves a gap from confirmed, and for decades, that gap has stayed frustratingly wide. Then, a few years ago, Off the coast of California, a drone happened to be flying at exactly the right moment, capturing something that came closer to answering this exact question than anything researchers had ever recorded before. A wildlife filmmaker named Carlos Gauna had spent thousands of hours flying drones over the water off the coast of Santa Barbara, California, capturing footage of great white sharks swimming close to unsuspecting beachgoers. Most days brought nothing, especially unusual. One particular flight changed everything. Roughly 1,000 feet from the beach, in water shallow enough that swimmers were splashing nearby without any idea what was underneath them, the drone camera caught something drifting near the surface that looked completely unlike any shark footage ever recorded before. The shark in the footage measured barely 5 feet long, tiny compared to the 20-foot giants this story has already described. Its entire body appeared covered in a strange, pale, almost white coating, giving it a ghostly, washed-out look completely different from the sleek grey and white coloring every other great white shark on record carries. Researchers who studied the footage afterward, including shark biologist Philip Stearns, described it as unlike anything they had ever seen before. Two competing explanations emerged almost immediately. One suggested some kind of unusual skin condition, something never previously documented in this species. The other, considered more likely by the scientists who reviewed the footage most closely, pointed towards something far more remarkable. Pregnant great white sharks are believed to produce a nutrient-rich substance inside the womb, sometimes described as uterine milk, that helps nourish developing pups before birth. If that theory holds, the pale coating drifting around this tiny shark may have been the literal remains of that substance, meaning cameras may have captured a shark that had entered the ocean only hours, or possibly even minutes, earlier. Picture something being born and photographed within the very first hour of its entire life. That is roughly the scale of what this footage may represent, assuming the leading interpretation turns out to be correct. Adding another layer to the discovery, the exact stretch of water where the drone captured this footage had already been suspected as a likely great white nursery, based on years of smaller, young sharks repeatedly showing up in that same general area. A newborn appearing in a location scientists already believed was significant made the footage even harder to dismiss as coincidence. Researchers remain careful about the exact language here, since even the leading experts involved stopped short of calling this footage absolute, ironclad proof. What they will say is that this represents the closest anyone has ever come to answering a question that has haunted shark science for generations. A possible glimpse at the true beginning of a great white shark's life, caught entirely by chance, from a drone hovering above a public beach. That discovery raises an obvious follow-up question. If newborn sharks are drifting near a popular beach in California, where do young sharks go once they need to grow, hide from danger, and survive their most vulnerable years? On the opposite coast of the country, near one of the busiest cities on the planet, researchers stumbled onto an answer nobody expected to find so close to home. Picture the exact opposite of a remote, untouched wilderness. Packed beaches, ferry boats, fishing charters, running constant loops along the shoreline. Millions of people living within driving distance of the water. That is the setting where researchers stumbled onto one of the most important great white shark discoveries in decades. A research organization called OceArch spent years tagging great white sharks along the east coast of the United States, tracking their movements through a public satellite map anyone with an internet connection could follow. Slowly, a pattern began forming near the waters off Long Island, New York, one that eventually became impossible to ignore. Small, young sharks, some weighing barely 50 pounds, kept showing up in the exact same stretch of water, year after year, clustered inside a rough triangle stretching between Montauk Point, Cape May in New Jersey, and New York City itself. Researchers tagged 9 separate baby great white sharks in that region within just a couple of weeks during one expedition. an astonishing number for an animal most people assume avoids crowded coastlines entirely. One lead scientist working on the project called it, without hesitation, probably the single most important discovery the team had ever made anywhere in the ocean. Follow-up research revealed something even more precise. More than 90% of the tracked baby sharks stayed within roughly 12 miles of shore, sticking almost entirely to shallow water, running parallel to the coastline rather than venturing out into open ocean where larger predators, including fully grown adult great whites, patrol regularly. Think about why that pattern makes sense from a young shark's point of view. A 5-foot-long pup stands almost no chance against an adult great white stretching past 20 feet, an animal that would not hesitate to treat a smaller, unfamiliar shark as easy prey. Staying close to shore, in water too shallow for the biggest sharks to comfortably patrol, works as a survival strategy, buying young sharks time to grow large enough to eventually hold their own. This discovery carries real weight beyond simple curiosity. Scientists believe protecting an area like this could directly influence how many great white sharks survive into adulthood across the entire region, since a nursery destroyed or disturbed at this exact life stage could ripple forward for decades, shrinking the total population long before those sharks ever reach full size. There is something almost poetic buried inside this discovery too. One of the most feared predators on the planet spends the most vulnerable years of its life hiding in shallow water within sight of some of the most crowded, heavily used beaches in the entire country, essentially raising its young in humanity's backyard without a single confirmed serious incident tracing back to that nursery. For an animal fully grown adult great whites clearly avoid, a much bigger question naturally follows. If baby sharks fear grown sharks of their own species, what predator, if any, could possibly frighten a fully mature great white? Picture the food chain as most people learned it in school. Small fish get eaten by bigger fish get eaten by seals get eaten by great white sharks, and great white sharks, sitting comfortably at the very top, get eaten by absolutely nothing. For most of scientific history, that final assumption held up completely. Then, in October of 1997, tourists aboard a whale-watching boat near the Farallon Islands, just off the coast of San Francisco, witnessed something that shattered it entirely. 2 orcas, a mother and her calf, appeared near a group of feeding sea lions. As the boat crew watched through their cameras, the orcas turned their attention towards something else entirely, a great white shark swimming nearby. Within minutes, the orcas had killed the shark and begun eating one very specific part of its body. This marked the first time anyone had ever documented, on camera, a killer whale successfully hunting a great white shark. The location made the discovery even harder to accept. Every year, roughly 100 great white sharks gathered near the Farallon Islands specifically to feast on the area's massive seal population. A reliable, predictable hunting ground researchers had studied closely for years. After that single orca attack, something remarkable happened. The entire shark population left the islands almost immediately, abandoning their annual feeding season early, well before the seals they depended on had even finished arriving. Researchers studying the area for years afterward confirmed the pattern held firm. Whenever orcas showed up near the Farallon Islands, tagged great white sharks consistently fled the area, sometimes staying away for the better part of an entire year before cautiously returning. Think about the scale of what that actually means. An animal capable of everything covered throughout this entire story. A bite stronger than a lion's, a body built like a torpedo, senses tuned to detect a heartbeat through total darkness, will drop everything and flee the instant a specific predator enters its territory. That reaction alone reveals something profound about how great white sharks actually experience the ocean around them. It is an animal running its own version of the same calorie math and risk assessment covered earlier in this story, except now the shark itself sits on the wrong side of the equation, weighing the very real danger of becoming someone else's meal, capable of genuine fear despite everything else this story has shown about its power. For years after that first Farallon Island sighting, scientists treated it as a rare, almost freakish exception, a single unlucky shark caught in the wrong place at exactly the wrong moment. Then, on the opposite side of the planet, off the coast of South Africa, something started happening that made it clear this was not a fluke at all. It was a hunting strategy, and two specific orcas were about to become famous for perfecting it. Along the coast near Gansby, South Africa, a region once nicknamed the Great White Shark Capital of the World, thanks to its massive population of resident sharks, something started washing up on local beaches that nobody could immediately explain. Dead great white sharks, several of them, kept appearing on the sand with a single, oddly specific injury. Their livers, an organ that in a shark can account for close to a third of its entire body weight, were missing completely, removed with a precision that looked almost surgical. A shark biologist named Alison Towner led the team that eventually pieced together what was happening. The wounds on each carcass matched a very particular pattern: clean, evenly spaced bite marks, concentrated entirely around the pectoral fins, as if something had pulled those fins apart deliberately to open up the body and extract exactly one organ, leaving nearly everything else on the carcass untouched. The culprits turned out to be two specific male orcas, nicknamed Port and Starboard by researchers who had been tracking them for years, distinguishable by a pair of collapsed dorsal fins that flopped to one side instead of standing straight upright. Researchers eventually captured drone and helicopter footage of the two orcas in action, and the behavior on screen left even experienced marine biologists stunned. The pair worked as a coordinated team, chasing down a great white shark, flipping it upside down, a position that triggers a strange, temporary paralysis in sharks, and then extracting the liver with what one researcher described as almost surgical precision, like watching an operation performed with a scalpel instead of teeth. The reason behind the target makes complete sense once you remember the calorie math covered earlier in this story. A shark's liver is packed with rich, fatty oil, making it one of the single most calorie-dense meals available anywhere in the entire ocean, arguably an even richer prize than the blubber inside a seal. Orcas, it turns out, are running the exact same energy-focused calculations great white sharks use when choosing their own prey. Except this time, the great white shark itself sits on the menu. Picture two specific killer whales, recognizable by name and by fin shape, patrolling an entire coastline and specifically hunting down the ocean's most feared predator for one single, calorie-rich organ, while ignoring almost everything else about the shark's body once that organ has been removed. The impact of Port and Starboard's presence went far beyond a handful of dead sharks washing up on the sand. Their hunting technique triggered something researchers had never fully documented before, proof that a single predator showing up in one specific location could quietly reshape an entire coastal ecosystem, from the great white sharks themselves all the way down to the smallest fish living along that same stretch of coast. For years, False Bay, South Africa, ranked among the single best places on the entire planet to watch great white sharks hunt. Boats packed with tourists gathered near a spot called Seal Island almost every winter morning, hoping to witness the explosive breaching attacks described earlier in this story, sharks launching completely airborne while chasing seals near the surface. Then, starting around 2017, something changed. Orca sightings in the region began climbing steadily. Great white shark sightings, once reliable enough to build an entire tourism industry around, began collapsing almost as fast. By a few years later, researchers documented something that would have sounded impossible only a decade earlier. Great white sharks had essentially disappeared from False Bay entirely, abandoning one of their most famous, most reliable hunting grounds on the planet. Scientists studying the area watched the entire local ecosystem shift in response, almost like watching dominoes fall one after another. With great white sharks gone, the local seal population, no longer facing its primary natural predator, grew rapidly, essentially unchecked. Those growing seal numbers then began putting heavier pressure on the fish populations seals feed on. Even seven-gill sharks, a completely different species that great white sharks normally kept away from certain areas through simple presence alone, started showing up in locations they had rarely been seen before, since the animal that once controlled their movement had vanished from the equation entirely. Think about what that reveals. A single predator disappearing from one specific bay rippled outward through layer after layer of the local food chain, changing which animals thrived, which struggled, and which suddenly found themselves free to roam into territory that had been off limits for generations. This is the exact same mechanism ecologists have documented in completely different environments around the world, from wolves reshaping entire forests in Yellowstone National Park to sea otters controlling kelp forests along the Pacific coast. Remove an apex predator from anywhere, and the effects rarely stay contained to just that one animal. Here is what makes the False Bay story especially remarkable. The predator being pushed out was the great white shark itself, an animal every previous chapter in this story has described as one of the single most dominant hunters on the entire planet, forced into retreat by something even more dangerous, showing up in its own backyard. An animal capable of a bite stronger than a lion's, capable of launching entirely out of the water to kill prey most predators could never catch, chose to abandon an entire ecosystem rather than risk a confrontation it could not win. That level of caution did not appear overnight. It runs through bloodlines stretching back further than almost any other creature alive today. Back to a point in Earth's history so distant it comes before dinosaurs, before trees, before almost anything modern science can easily picture. Try picturing the entire history of life on Earth compressed into a single 24-hour day. Dinosaurs would not even show up until well into the evening. Humans, every single person who has ever lived, would occupy only the last few seconds before midnight. Sharks, in some form, would already be swimming by early afternoon. Fossil evidence traces the shark family tree back roughly 400 million years, making sharks older than trees, older than flowering plants, and older than the very first dinosaurs by a margin of well over 100 million years. While entire continents drifted, collided, and split apart, while ice ages came and went, while 5 separate mass extinction events wiped out the vast majority of species alive on the planet at each moment, sharks kept swimming through all of it. That kind of staying power reflects a body plan that got the fundamentals right early on and simply never needed a major redesign. A shark's skeleton, made almost entirely of flexible cartilage instead of solid bone, allows for exactly the kind of speed and agility described throughout this entire story, while still holding up structurally against the crushing pressure of open ocean water. Picture an engineer today designing a brand new predator completely from scratch, with the goal of surviving unpredictable conditions across hundreds of millions of years. That engineer would likely end up sketching something remarkably close to a shark, a design so efficient that evolution largely left the core blueprint untouched across an almost unimaginable stretch of time. The great white shark itself, the specific species at the center of this entire story, represents a far more recent branch on that ancient family tree, evolving into roughly its modern form somewhere between 5 and 11 million years ago. Even that timeline dwarfs almost anything else most people consider ancient. Modern humans, by comparison, have existed for a small fraction of that span, closer to 300,000 years. This deep history helps explain something covered earlier in this story: the strange, almost impossible-sounding confidence a great white shark shows in avoiding low-value meals and unfamiliar threats. Behavior patterns, this consistent, this deeply wired, this reliably present across sharks living on opposite sides of the planet, do not develop over a few thousand years. They get carved in slowly, generation after generation, across a timeline longer than almost any other creature alive today has had the chance to exist. For decades, one persistent myth attached itself to this ancient lineage, a popular idea connecting the great white shark directly to an even larger, even more terrifying ancestor that once ruled the oceans. Recent research has revealed that connection is not nearly as simple or as accurate as most people assume. Ask almost anyone what the great white shark's closest ancient relative might be, and one name comes up almost automatically: Megalodon, the legendary giant shark that grew larger than a school bus and dominated ocean headlines for years through documentaries, video games, and blockbuster movies. For a long stretch of scientific history, researchers themselves believed the same thing. Early classification placed Megalodon and the great white shark on the exact same branch of the family tree, treating the great white as essentially a smaller, more recent descendant of its enormous prehistoric cousin. Newer fossil research completely overturned that assumption. Scientists studying tooth structure and jaw shape in detail eventually determined that Megalodon and the great white shark actually belong to entirely separate branches of the shark family tree, more like distant cousins who happen to look somewhat similar than a direct parent and child relationship. The great white's actual closest living relatives turn out to be mako sharks, fast, streamlined hunters built for speed rather than raw, overwhelming size. Picture two students who happen to share the exact same last name purely by coincidence, with no real family connection between them at all. Yet everyone at school assumes they must be siblings simply because the surface-level resemblance seems obvious. That mix-up, repeated often enough, eventually gets treated as accepted fact by almost everyone, right up until someone finally checks the actual records closely enough to catch the mistake. This correction matters for more than just historical trivia. It reshapes the entire timeline of how great white sharks actually evolved, separating a hugely popular, headline-grabbing giant from the story of the specific predator at the center of this entire video. Researchers studying ancient shark fossils found something else remarkable buried in the geological record, adding one more twist to this corrected history. Scientists analyzing fossil teeth found along the Pacific coast of South America, dating back somewhere between 2 and 5 million years, discovered evidence of what appears to be an ancient great white shark nursery, a location where young sharks were being born and raised long before any human walked the earth to witness it. That discovery suggests the exact nursery pattern described earlier in this story. Sharks protecting their most vulnerable young in specific, consistent locations is not some recent behavioral quirk. It may stretch back millions of years, passed down across an almost incomprehensible number of shark generations. So the great white shark built its own path entirely, evolving alongside its giant relative rather than descending from it. And somehow, despite every advantage covered throughout this entire story, it still ended up looking almost small by comparison to the sheer, staggering scale Megalodon once reached. Everything covered so far in this story has painted the great white shark as an almost unstoppable force, a bite stronger than a lion's, a body built like a torpedo, a predator so dominant that only a coordinated pair of orcas has ever proven capable of hunting it successfully. Now picture something large enough to make that same great white shark look almost ordinary by comparison. Megalodon, the extinct giant shark covered in the last chapter, is estimated to have reached lengths beyond 50 feet, roughly the length of 2 full-sized school buses parked end to end. Its estimated weight climbed into the tens of tons, dwarfing even the largest confirmed great white shark on record by an enormous margin. Scientists using digital reconstruction models, built from fossilized teeth and jaw fragments, calculated something almost impossible to fully picture. Megalodon may have generated a bite force reaching somewhere around 18 tons of pressure, a number roughly 10 times stronger than the already devastating bite force covered earlier in this story for a great white shark. For comparison, even a Tyrannosaurus rex, one of the most feared land predators to ever exist, is estimated to have bitten with noticeably less raw force than scientists believe Megalodon could generate underwater. Picture standing next to a small pickup truck, then suddenly standing next to a massive freight train instead. That is roughly the jump in scale between a great white shark's bite, an animal this entire story has already described as one of the most powerful predators alive today, and the bite of the extinct giant that ruled the oceans millions of years earlier. Researchers still debate exactly what caused Megalodon to go extinct somewhere around 3 million years ago, with theories ranging from shifting ocean temperatures to changes in available prey as the world's climate cooled dramatically. Whatever the exact cause, an animal capable of generating that much raw power still could not survive the changes happening around it. That detail carries real weight for understanding the great white shark's own story. Size and raw power alone did not guarantee survival for Megalodon, despite sitting comfortably at the very top of its own food chain for millions of years. The great white shark, smaller, faster, and arguably far more adaptable, managed to survive every single environmental shift that eventually wiped its giant relative off the planet entirely. Surviving nearly every mass extinction and every climate shift the ocean has thrown at it across millions of years turns out to be a very different challenge than surviving the one force that has managed to threaten this ancient predator more than any other in its entire 400 million year history. Modern human beings, showing up only in the last few seconds of that 24-hour clock described earlier, and already reshaping the great white shark's future more dramatically than anything nature managed across the previous 400 million years combined. An animal that outlasted 5 separate mass extinction events, that survived the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs, that adapted through ice ages and shifting oceans across 400 million years, is now closer to disappearing than most people realize. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, the organization responsible for officially tracking extinction risk across every species on the planet, currently classifies the great white shark as vulnerable, just one single category away from endangered. Estimates on the total remaining population vary depending on the exact region studied, but multiple research groups place the worldwide number somewhere below 3,500 individual great white sharks. Picture every single great white shark left on the entire planet gathering in one place. That entire population would fit comfortably inside a single large sports stadium with plenty of empty seats left over. Several different threats stack on top of each other to explain the decline. Commercial fishing nets, set for completely different species, end up accidentally catching great white sharks far more often than most people assume. A problem researchers call bycatch. Sport hunters have targeted the species for decades, specifically for trophies. Drawn toward the exact same size and reputation, this entire story has spent so much time exploring. Shark fin soup, considered a delicacy in parts of the world, has driven demand for great white shark fins specifically, adding yet another layer of pressure on top of everything else. Here is the detail that should genuinely stop you cold after everything covered throughout this entire story. Researchers estimate that humans kill somewhere around 100 million sharks of all species combined every single year through fishing, finning, and hunting. Now hold that number next to a very different one. Across that same span of time, sharks of every species combined are responsible for roughly 10 human deaths worldwide in a typical year. Read those two numbers again, back to back. 100 million sharks killed by human activity. Roughly 10 humans killed by sharks. That gap sits in an entirely different universe of scale, one where a small handful of tragic encounters gets weighed against a number 10 million times larger. An animal, this story has spent 30 chapters proving, is far more cautious, far more selective, and far less dangerous to humans than its reputation suggests, turns out to be facing an actual, measurable threat to its long-term survival. And that threat comes entirely from the species it has spent millions of years quietly avoiding. Some of that threat is starting to shift, slowly. Modern tracking programs now let ordinary people follow individual sharks in real time through public satellite maps, watching tagged animals ping their location as they migrate across entire ocean basins, turning a once invisible predator into something people can actually watch, learn from, and root for, instead of simply fear. That growing understanding sets up the final piece of this entire story. The one question every single fact covered so far has been quietly building toward. For most of human history, encountering a great white shark meant either studying a dead specimen hauled onto a dock or catching a brief, terrifying glimpse of a fin before it vanished beneath the surface. Understanding this animal meant working almost entirely with fragments, guesswork, and fear. That has changed dramatically in just the last couple of decades. Research teams around the world now regularly capture great white sharks, gently and briefly, to attach a small satellite tag near the dorsal fin. Every time that shark's fin breaks the surface, the tag sends a signal up to an orbiting satellite, pinpointing the shark's exact location and instantly updating a public map. Anyone with a phone or a computer can pull up and explore for free. Sharks tracked this way get individual names, turning an entire species once reduced to a single, faceless monster into thousands of specific, trackable individuals with their own personalities and migration patterns. One particularly famous tagged shark, a large female named Mary Lee, gathered an enormous online following during her years being tracked, with people checking her location constantly, celebrating when she surfaced near a familiar coastline, and genuinely worrying when her tag went quiet for stretches at a time. Picture checking an app the same way you might check the score of your favorite sports team. Except instead of following an athlete, you are following an actual wild predator, swimming somewhere in the ocean at this exact moment, completely unaware that thousands of people are watching a dot representing its exact location move slowly across a map. This shift matters far beyond simple entertainment value. Every single ping collected from every tagged shark feeds directly into scientific research, helping build the exact kind of data that uncovered the White Shark Cafe, the nursery near Long Island, and the deep, 400-million-year-old patterns of behavior covered throughout this entire story. Public fascination and hard science, for once, are running on the exact same track together. There is something almost poetic buried in this shift too, especially once you consider everything covered so far in this story. An animal once defined entirely by a handful of terrifying, rare encounters is slowly becoming defined instead by patient, detailed, real-time observation, the same tool that revealed a bite and release pattern rather than an ongoing hunt, a curious, investigative mouth rather than a mindless killing machine, and an animal capable of fear itself when facing the one predator that outmatches it. Every fact stacked throughout this entire journey, the calorie math, the blurry vision, the electrical sense, the ancient bloodline, the orcas, the vanishing population, points toward the exact same conclusion sitting quietly underneath the surface the whole time. It is time to put every single piece of this story together and finally answer the question this entire journey was built around from the very first sentence. Picture everything this journey has covered, laid out side by side, one final time. An animal capable of a bite stronger than a lion's, powerful enough to end a human life in a single strike. An animal with senses so sharp it can feel a heartbeat through total darkness, tracking a wounded creature purely through an invisible electrical signal humans cannot even perceive. An animal that has survived 5 mass extinction events, outlasting the dinosaurs, outlasting ice ages, carrying a bloodline stretching back 400 million years into Earth's ancient past. That same animal, given millions of daily opportunities across beaches, surf breaks, and dive sites worldwide, chooses almost every single time to leave humans completely alone. It runs constant calorie math, rejecting a lean, bony human body in favor of a fat-rich seal every time real hunger drives the decision. It investigates unfamiliar objects with the only tool evolution ever gave it, a mouth instead of hands, testing gently rather than attacking with the explosive, committed force it reserves entirely for actual prey. It saves its most violent hunting technique, an ambush so powerful it can launch a 5,000-pound body completely out of the ocean, almost exclusively for seals, never for us. It even runs from danger itself, fleeing an entire coastline, the instant two specific orcas show up looking for an easy meal. It is a cautious, curious, deeply instinctive predator, running calculations sharpened across a timeline longer than almost anything else alive on the planet today. It happens to look terrifying purely because of its size and its teeth, rather than because of how it actually behaves toward us. Now hold that entire picture next to a very different number, the one this story revealed just a chapter ago. Roughly 10 human deaths worldwide each year connected to sharks of any species. Roughly 100 million sharks killed by human hands across that exact same span of time. If danger gets measured honestly, by actual bodies and actual numbers rather than by movie posters and old headlines, the species doing almost all of the killing in this story was never the one swimming through the water in the first place. Somewhere off a coastline right now, a great white shark is gliding past swimmers who have no idea it is even there, running the exact same quiet, cautious calculations. This entire story has spent 33 chapters uncovering. It has already judged you the wrong shape of meal, and already moved on towards something that actually fits what its body truly needs, gliding past without ever announcing that it was there at all. The ocean's most feared predator was never the monster the world built it into. It never needed to be.